Okay, welcome to my class. We're going to talk about the Russian Revolution real fast. We're going to try and keep this under 5 to 6 minutes, and let's just see how fast we can go. So, let's see what I can do. Okay, so we need to flash back to World War I. You remember this from our in-person class sessions, that World War I sucked. It started in 1914 when Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. And also you had this huge tangled system of alliances and things like that drug a whole bunch of countries in that really did not want to be a part of this, but maybe deep down they kind of did. The whole culture of militarism and things like that we've talked about. Anyway. I just totally lost my train of thought. Okay, quick other background information. Russia was pulled into this war as a result of those tangled alliances. Russia at the time had a monarchy called, the king was called a Tsar, C-Z-A-R, and this guy was really the one that ran the show. There was some crappy stuff that happened in like 1905 or 1906 with him, Bloody Sunday, some people were killed. He's not a good guy. He's not the best king that they've ever had, and the war is giving people a really negative opinion of him. Right? When lots of people are dying, when lots of people are starving in the streets, you tend to not really like the guy that's running the show. So people started to want some change, especially in the war. All right, Russia was losing hundreds of thousands of people. They're fighting Germany and Austria-Hungary at the exact same time, and the Germans are really trying to push into Russia, or at the very least, get Russia to disengage, which brings us to our next point. Right, so the Germans want Russia to disengage and pull out of the war. Because if you look at a map, you have France on one side of Germany, Russia on the other side of Germany. If you can get Russia to withdraw from the war, suddenly Germany doesn't have to split their armies to fight on these two borders. They can just send all their soldiers to one front, and hopefully, the hope is that they'll be able to crush French resistance and just shut the war down, and they're hoping for a quick finish. That's what they're really shooting for here. How do you get a country like Russia to disengage? How do you get them to withdraw from a war? Well, you could shoot enough people, but that's turning out pretty poorly, because it turns out whenever you fight people, your people die too. Unless you have like super soldiers or something, but that's not what the Germans have. So what the Germans decide to do is kind of ingenious. They track down a guy named Vladimir Lenin who's been living in exile in a country called Switzerland. Now, Vladimir Lenin used to live in Russia. He's a Russian by birth, and he absolutely hates Tsar Nicholas II, king. The Tsar had Lenin's brother killed at one point in time. And not only that, Lenin is also a devout communist. Right? He's super radical, and he really wants to see the kind of change in Russia that would bring about a communist rule. He strongly believes in what he calls the dictatorship of the proletariat and the abolition of all these higher forms of authority, specifically a monarchy that is really just, according to the people of Russia, causing more harm than good, especially in a world war. So, anyway, Lenin is, by the German government, shipped into Russia by train, along with some followers, some money, and some guns. Right? It's all perfect plan. What could go wrong? Well, the Zimmerman telegram. Right? But we're not going to talk about that right now. We're focusing on Russia. So Lenin arrives in Russia, along with his followers, his weapons, and his supplies and money, and he starts gathering followers, and he's able to amass a pretty good following. He gets there in about 1916, by the way. There were two revolutions that actually ended up happening. So the first revolution was the February Revolution. It occurred in 1917, February of 1917. Well, really it was March. Excuse me. They used a different calendar. Don't worry about that. Just know the February Revolution. This is what got Tsar Nicholas II off the throne and created what they called the Provisional Government. The Provisional Government was basically just a temporary government that they're going to try to sort things out, fix the problems first. Once those problems are fixed, then we can come up with a more permanent solution. That was the whole plan. But the Provisional Government really sucked. They were not getting anything done. And I don't want to be too critical of them. They were getting things done, but not what the people were hoping would get done, right? So almost every Russian wants to completely pull out of the war. They're ready to just cut and run. They're done. They're sick of it. They want to stop. And so once the provisional government does not do that, more people are dying, people are still starving, life is still pretty tough. That is then perfect ground for Lenin and his followers to then rally people around him. He starts promising them 3 things: peace, land, and bread. Those were his 3 things that he just kept driving home, like, just like, you know what I'm saying. So he kept just driving home this peace, land, and bread thing, where peace, obviously from a world war. Land, because recently people had been set free from serfdom in Russia, and they sort of would like to have their own land and their own property. And bread. They're hungry. What do you do? So, the October Revolution led to an all-out civil war in Russia. The communists gathered together in what they called the Red Army. The Red Army was just, like I said, mostly made up of communists. They were led by this dude named Trotsky. You don't really need to know that, but the Red Army, their whole goal is to try to wipe out resistance for the most part. Anti-communist or people who were sympathetic towards the monarchy formed what they called the White Army. The White Army had a bunch of different goals. They were really disorganized, they were not united in one common mindset, and they didn't have single leadership from what I can understand, what I've read and what I've heard. Meanwhile, the communists, the Red Army, definitely unified, one leadership, one goal. They're pushing forward to one thing and one thing only. By 1922, the Red Army was victorious, and they wiped out all resistance. Tsar Nicholas II and his family had been murdered in 1918, towards the end of the war. Not the Civil War, but towards the end of the First World War. Him and his family were hiding in a basement. They were supposed to be under the protection of the communists, but they were blown to pieces. And then their bodies were just sort of thrown out into the woods. It sucks. By 1922, Vladimir Lenin and his followers managed to create the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, also known as the Soviet Union. A Soviet is just a Russian workers' union. You should be familiar with that from our discussion on the Industrial Revolution. There you go. By December 30th, 1922, the Soviet Union was born, and the first communist nation on Earth was created. We're going to talk more about what life was like in that communist nation in the next video. If you have any questions, feel free to inbox me. I'm here to help. Go through, take the quiz afterwards, and